Hi, I'm Lindsey Elliott. If this is your first time here, then welcome. And if you're coming back, thanks so much for coming back again. So today I want to talk about something I think that most of us live with, but almost never question, which is the voice in your head, the inner critic it's sometimes called. That running commentary that tells you that you've said the wrong thing in a conversation or a meeting, or that you should have handled a conversation with your daughter better, or that other women your age have got it all figured out, or have figured out something that you haven't. And the specific thing that I want to look at today is not how to silence that voice, but how to talk back to it, or even how to reframe it. I want to look at why it sounds so convincing in the first place. Because once you start to see this, something shifts. And not because you've learned a technique, but because you've seen something about how this voice actually works. So, just to be clear about what I'm talking about. So this isn't the occasional self-doubt that everybody has. This is a constant low-level voice that's running in the background most days. So this typical things that it might say is it might replay a conversation that you had 3 hours ago and tells you what you should have said instead. Or it might be there for 3 days while you're trying to make a decision, picking apart every option and finding problems with each of them, and then second guessing the decision once you've finally made it. It also notices when someone takes a few hours to reply to a text and decides it must mean something about you or about something that you've done. And another favourite is comparing you to other women in meetings who might seem more articulate, or a friend who seems to have it more together, or the version of you 10 years ago. So it also might tell you that you should be further along in your life by now, or you should be over something by now, or you should have handled something better. So if any of that is familiar, if you've got this voice in your head, then this video is for you. So here's the thing that I want to make clear, and it's the thing that most people don't see, is you probably think that the inner critic sounds convincing because what it's saying is true, or partly true, or true enough that you can't dismiss it. But that isn't actually why it sounds convincing. So it sounds convincing for a much more basic reason. It sounds convincing because it's coming from inside your own head. And we've all been taught implicitly from the time that we were small, that what's going on inside our own head is who we are. That our thoughts are us. That if you think it on some level, you mean it. So when the voice says that you handled that badly, you don't experience that as a thought passing through. You experience that as your own judgment, as a fact that you've noticed something about yourself. And that's the misunderstanding right there. That's the bit that keeps the whole thing alive. And there's also something else I want to say about this voice that I think gets missed a lot. So we tend to talk about it as if it's your voice, your inner critic, your harsh self-talk, as if it's sort of been generated by you from scratch inside your own head, but it hasn't. This voice in your head is made up of an enormous amount of stuff that was never originally yours. So it's the voice of your mum, it's the voice of your dad, it's the voice of the teacher who told you off in front of the class when you were 8. It's the voice of the friend who made a comment at a party 15 years ago and you've never forgotten it. It's the standards within your family about how women should behave. It's all the things you absorbed at school about being polite, about being good, about being clever. It's every single message you've ever taken from culture, from advertising, from social media, or, about how a woman should look at this age, what she should have achieved by now, what kind of mother or partner or professional you should be by now. And all of that has just been pouring into all of us for decades. And your mind has done what all minds do, which is absorb it, repeat it, and then start playing it back to you in your own voice. So when you hear what sounds like your own honest assessment of yourself, a lot of the time what you're actually hearing is conditioning, repetition, habit, beliefs that have been said around you and to you so many times that they now sound like it's your own thinking. And this matters because once you see that that's true, the voice loses a layer of authority straight away. It's not some wise inner voice having a quiet word with you. It's a mashup of decades of inherited material that's being played back, at speed all of the time. But you've innocently just been treating it like it's truth. So let me give you an example because I think it's much easier to see this when we put it into a real life situation. So imagine that you're at a work dinner and you're sitting across from someone that maybe you don't know very well, and you make a joke and it doesn't quite land and there's a little bit of an awkward moment, and then the conversation moves on. So when you're in the taxi on the way home, your mind will have produced something like this. It will start talking to you. That was so awkward. Why did I say that? He or she probably thinks I'm trying too hard. I always do this in these situations. I'm rubbish at networking. I should have been just listening more. Everyone else at that table was much more polished than I am. I always feel like I'm on the back foot in these types of events or spaces, and on it goes. Now, if you had a friend who was sitting in the back of the taxi with you and she was the one saying all of that about herself, what would you do? You would push back, right? You'd say, hang on, it was just a joke. She probably didn't even notice it and you're being really hard on yourself. You're overthinking it. And you'd hear it for what it is, which is one person's commentary running, not the truth of what happened. But because it's happening inside your head, you don't hear it that way. You hear it as you responsibly reflecting on the evening. You hear it as you having an honest moment with yourself. And it isn't. It's just the voice. And the voice is doing what voices in our heads do, which is generating commentary at speed and presenting it as truth. So I want to go a bit further into why this voice is so good at what it does, because it's not random. There are a few specific things that are going on. So the first is that the voice usually has some kernel of truth in it. The joke didn't land in our example. That part is observable. So when the voice then adds 20 layers of meaning on top of it, those layers feel credible because the bottom layer was real. And this is one of the cleverest things that our beautiful minds will do. It takes one actual fact and then builds an entire narrative on top of it. And so the whole structure feels true because the foundation is true. And the second thing is that the voice knows your life. It knows your specific worries. It knows the things that you're sensitive about. So it doesn't just sound like a general critic. It sounds like someone who's been watching you your whole life, because it has. It's been with you since you were a child. And in fact, the voice of the worries is also the voice. The voice of the sensitivities is also the voice in the head. So it's really the mind actually talking to itself with you noticing it. And that's the thing that makes it feel different from a stranger's opinion. A stranger doesn't know that you've always felt a bit out of place in work meetings, but that inner voice does. So when it points it out, it doesn't feel like noise in the head. It feels like truth. It feels like recognition. And then the third thing is that the voice tends to show up when you're already a bit tired, a bit depleted, or a bit emotionally activated, or a bit doubtful. It rarely turns up when we feel really solid. It turns up when there's a gap between how you want to feel and be and how you actually feel, and maybe when that's bigger than usual, which means that by the time you're hearing it, you're already in a state where you're much more likely to believe it. So when we put all of this together, the kernel of truth, the intimate knowledge of your life, and some kind of state of depletion, that lowers your resistance. And of course it sounds convincing. It's like the most personalised, most precisely targeted commentary you are ever going to encounter. Nobody else can pull this off. It's an inside job. And so here's the thing. None of that makes it true. Convincing is not the same as true. So a really good salesman is convincing. That doesn't mean that you need what he's selling. Or a really good lawyer is convincing. That doesn't mean that their client is innocent. And a really good piece of fiction, a really beautiful book, is convincing. That doesn't mean that it actually happened. So the voice in your head is convincing because of where it's coming from and because of how it's constructed, but not because of what it's actually saying. And once you start to see this, you don't have to fight the voice, you don't have to argue with it, you don't have to reframe it, you don't have to make it quieter. What changes is your relationship to it, and that's where the power is. You start to notice it in the way that you might notice the weather. It's there, it's doing its thing, but it just isn't the truth of you anymore. So if you're watching this and you've spent years thinking the problem is that your inner critic is too loud or too harsh, or that you need to learn how to silence it, I would really like to invite you to consider that the problem isn't actually any of those things. The problem is that you've been believing it. That's it. And not because you're weak or because you haven't done enough work on yourself, but because believing it is just your default. Nobody's ever really sat you down and said, well, that commentary in your head isn't who you are. But you've spent decades probably, like I did, treating it like it is. So if you can see that even a little bit, that this voice is just one voice generated by a mind, doing its thing, made up of decades of inherited conditioning, and that the real you is the one noticing it, that's when things start to change. You can't be the voice and the one noticing the voice at the same time. So if you can hear it, you're not it. So that's where I'm going to leave it for today, but I would love to invite you to spend the next few days just noticing the voice, not trying to change it, not trying to make it kinder, just noticing it. See how often it's running, see what it tends to say. You'll notice how habitual it is, and see if you can spot the moments where it slips in a layer of meaning into something really neutral. And in the video next week, I'm going to take this a step further, and we're going to talk about how to actually stop believing it. So not by talking back to it or reframing it, but just by seeing something about it that changes the whole game. And then in June of 2026, if you're watching this in the future, I'm going to be running a masterclass series where I'm going to be going into this in much more depth, to really help you to see clearly in a way that the voice in your head can genuinely lose its grip. So I'll be sharing more about that soon. But for now, thank you so much for watching this video. If you have found it helpful, please do subscribe to my channel and give this video a like. It really helps my little channel to grow. And if you know someone who is, often caught up in the voice in their head, overthinks a lot, then please consider sharing it with them. So thanks so much for being here, and I'll see you next week. Bye.